My name is Jean Andre, and I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Environment at the University of Waterloo. Welcome to this celebratory event, the launch of the Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Aeronautics, fondly called WISA. We're absolutely thrilled that so many of you are able to join us today. We have representatives here from industry, government, community members, educators, researchers. WISA represents an important milestone on our campus and in the aeronautics community because it formalizes the need for and a shared commitment to work together on problems and opportunities in the aeronautics sector. I would like to begin today by publicly acknowledging the history of the land that the University of Waterloo is situated on. The Waterloo, Kitchener, and Cambridge campuses of the university are on the Haldimand Tract, land that was promised to the Six Nations of the Grand River, land within the territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our ability to work and live here now in Waterloo region is tied to policies of expulsion, assimilation, and abuse of Indigenous peoples during the times of settlement and confederation and since. We have a responsibility to acknowledge and understand this history, these truths, and the current experiences of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and for this understanding to inform the work that we do. We're hosting the event today as a university committed to working on and off campus to not only advance the goals of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, but also to create a long-term vision for a university that is grounded on decolonization. Now, to get our event underway formally, I would like to introduce the President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Waterloo to say a few words. Dr. Vivek Goel, who became the 7th President of the University on July the 1st of this year, is a distinguished scholar with extensive achievements in research, teaching, and leadership across both public and private sectors. He's recognized in Canada and around the world as a leading public health researcher, a health services evaluation expert, and a champion for the use of research evidence in health policymaking. Prior to coming to the University of Waterloo, he held several senior posts at the University of Toronto. As you may already know from Dr. Goel's public communications, he is a firm believer that research-intensive universities like ours at the University of Waterloo are ideally poised to help co-create solutions for today's problems and thus to contribute to a better future. Welcome, President Goel.
Thank you, Jean. Hello, and welcome to all our community members and partners joining us from across the globe, including our current and future students, the next generation of trailblazers. I also understand that our Member of Parliament, the newly re-elected Honorable Bardish Chagger, is also with us, and thank you for joining us today. I'm so excited to be here to celebrate the launch of the Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Aeronautics. I'd like to extend my warmest congratulations to all members and the entire WISA team on this milestone. I also want to acknowledge the leadership of President Verdun Hamdalapur, Dean Jean Andre, and the cross-disciplinary leadership across all 6 faculties for launching this important institute for the university and for the Canadian and global aerospace industry. WISA is well aligned with Waterloo's tradition of pushing beyond boundaries, bringing partners together to solve complex problems through innovation and training the next generation of entrepreneurial talent. As communities and societies look to rebuilding in a post-pandemic world, we have a real opportunity to address global challenges in ways we haven't before. This institute is the first of its kind in Canada to take on the challenge of making air transport sustainable. By leveraging the University of Waterloo's reputation for innovation, along with our deep expertise in environmental sustainability, the research and work at WISA will help transform this vital industry. Air transport has transformed and enabled so much in our lives. It's how we connect, receive necessities like vaccines, and it powers the global economy. But air transport is also a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. While the pandemic experience has demonstrated how we can connect virtually for many types of activities, such as we're doing today, we can also see that not everything can be done in that way. The need to travel globally will not go away. Reducing carbon emissions in air transport is one of the challenges WISA will be exploring, among other sustainability issues. As we look to our future, we need to expedite the rate of innovation to continue to create sustainable solutions for an evolving industry that is a force for good, and look at a more holistic approach to sustainability. Thank you to our partners who have been part of this leg of the journey and have encouraged and supported the creation of WISA. We look forward to imagining and creating a sustainable future together. I now invite you all to watch a video for a closer look at WISA.
Imagine a future where air transport connects people, commerce, and ideas sustainably, where innovative technologies fuel greener environmental practices, where diverse, inclusive, and equitable systems drive social progress, and where a future-ready workforce creates global economic prosperity. At the Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Aeronautics, we're not just imagining that future, we're creating it. Uniting world-leading experts across every faculty at the University of Waterloo, and innovating with industry and government partners to create real impact. From game-changing commercialization in our unique startup ecosystem to experiential learning that equips the best and brightest aviation leaders. We're harnessing Waterloo's immense innovative power to challenge the status quo. Through the power of partnership, we can build a sustainable future for aerospace and aviation. And we invite you to be part of the change, to question, explore, and innovate with us. And not only imagine a better world, but create it. Join the solution. Because at Waterloo, our greatest impact happens together.
Thank you for those words, President Goel, and also I hope you enjoyed the video. As both the president has said, and as the little video shows, WISA is the first institute of its kind in Canada to focus on the sustainability of the air sector from these multiple lenses: environmental, social, and economic. And University of Waterloo has world-class expertise in a variety of disciplines that are directly applicable to aviation and aerospace. And these are the folks that have already come to the table, people whose background is environmental science or engineering, kinesiology, optometry, computer science, and cognitive psychology. The aviation aerospace sector is facing distinct challenges associated with energy and environmental impacts, personnel shortages, equitable access to mobility, economic development, and the rapid evolution of technology, which can help to transform this sector. And by mobilizing the research capacity at the University of Waterloo and applying it toward innovative solutions to these sustainability challenges, we're establishing Waterloo at the forefront of aeronautics and aviation scholarship to support a future-ready, more sustainable air transport sector. And I have to say that having hundreds of students enrolled in our aviation degree programs does create a unique ecosystem for aeronautics applied research. Indeed, Waterloo has Canada's largest university-level aviation program, with student aviators earning their commercial pilot licenses along with advanced education in either environment or science through a collaboration between these two faculties. And collaboration is at the heart of WISA as well, with involvement and financial commitment from all 6 faculties, as well as the provosts and the president's offices, and with strong linkages with our local flight training partner, the Waterloo Wellington Flight Center, and with the aeronautics sector more broadly. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing the lift behind the creation of WISA, Dr. Suzanne Kearns, who is an internationally recognized and award-winning aviation academic, author, consultant, and educator with deep expertise in international aviation, human factors, safety management, and training methodologies. Dr. Kearns, who joined the University of Waterloo in 2016, is the founding director of WISA. She's also past president of the University Aviation Association, a fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society, and instructional designer and e-learning developer for international agencies, including the International Civil Aviation Organization and the Canadian Council for Aviation and Aerospace. Suzanne, maybe you can share a few words and let us in on this dream that you've been building.
Jean, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today to celebrate something which is truly, I think, a monumental point in my career and hopefully something that will have big impact for many years to come in the future. To begin, I'd just like to start with some of the origins of WISA. When the pandemic paused all of our lives, I was struck by the immense hardship being experienced by our aviation colleagues and alumni. Calls to #SaveCanadianAviation were broadcast across social media. And it reminded me of my own journey, that although I began pilot training at the age of 15 and dreamed of being an airline pilot, in my experience, 9/11 happened, and that completely changed the nature of the industry and is what led to me pivoting into academia. So with the pandemic, I spent time thinking about how I could be of service to the industry as an academic, and reflecting on some of those main challenges that were being faced by the industry before the pandemic started, which included, like I've already been mentioned, the global personnel shortages, increasing recognition of the environmental impacts of aviation, and rapidly evolving technology. Interestingly, these align with the 3 pillars of sustainability: social, environmental, and economic. So my goal was, how can we use the pause during the pandemic to challenge the status quo, think hard about some of those challenges, and directly address them so that as the recovery occurs, we're in an improved position. And really, this is the goal of WISA, to mobilize the amazing innovative capacity at the University of Waterloo and directly target it towards aeronautical challenges. At its core, because not everyone is familiar with an institute is quite simple. It's about 2 things. It's about research and education. Of course, these are the core to the mandate of the university. However, the unique value that WISA offers is an ability to listen and learn from industry. We don't want to produce solutions that are looking for problems. We want to understand the most pressing problems and work collaboratively to create evidence-based solutions. Leading the creation of WISA has been an incredible journey and is truly the honor of my career. I've had a few people in the last few weeks ask me, how do you accomplish something so big and complex? To which I respond that I didn't. This was the result of many small tasks and many partnerships that slowly built momentum and collectively are how we have led to the creation of WISA. It was far from my effort alone, but a combination of the support, encouragement, and hard work of many people, including my partner in this journey, Mariam Latifour-Kaparoutis, Dean Andre and Dean Lemieux, who shared the vision that our undergraduate aviation programs, coupled with Waterloo's immense capacity, could create that unique ecosystem for aeronautical research. To Dean Wells, Dean Egger, Dean Liu, and Dean Giesbrecht, who facilitated connections in their faculties, and past President Hamda Lepore and President Goel, as well as Provost Jim Rush and our Vice President of Research, Charmaine Dean, for their leadership and support. Our Waterloo MP, Bartosz Chager, who actually engaged with me several years ago and helped us create some of the momentum to grow aviation at Waterloo. To my faculty and staff colleagues across campus who were willing to think outside the box and imagine how their disciplines can address aeronautical sustainability challenges. I'm also very grateful to the members of our advisory committee, which reach across government, academia, and industry, for believing in this vision and helping us align imagination with impact. Lastly, I'm thankful to Waterloo students who I see as the heart of WISA for your support in recognizing that research significantly enriches your education and the industry many of you will be shaping in the years to come. I'm excited about leading WISA into the future and working in collaboration and actively listening to industry to have true impact on this sector that means the world to me. Although no introduction is required, I would now like to introduce you to Commander Chris Hadfield, astronaut, author, and first Canadian commander of the International Space Station, and WISA's honorary advisor, to share his remarks. Thank you.
Dr. Kern, Suzanne, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure working with you in the aviation faculty at the University of Waterloo. And I'm very much looking forward to all that WISA is going to accomplish. As many folks on the call will know, I've had some incredible privilege in my life to orbit the world thousands of times. Someone counted it up, 2,650 times. And one of the things you come away with, seeing the world that way, is the common nature of life, of human life, the things that we hope for and the things that we aspire to, but also the connected nature of it. You can see the ships at sea, their wakes, you can see the roads, you can see the, how we have joined ourselves, but you can also see aviation from space. You can see the condensation trails of the jets. And what's maybe a surprise to everyone is that from orbit, the world is a still life. You don't see any motion just because of your speed and the distance, except for an airplane who's tugging a little condensed trail behind them. You can actually see the motion. And I did a thing with the snowbirds while I was in orbit. We came across the Pacific. It was the middle of the night for me, but they were practicing out of Comox on Vancouver Island, and over the Queen Charlottes there, over the blue water, 9 of them line abreast, turned on their smoke and drove along and did a turn around the corner. And I could look down from 400 kilometers above and see other human beings doing something from space, but which was really delightful, a lovely connection. But what you also see from orbit is history, the geologic history and the human history. And you start to think of the history of all of that transportation and human movement, right from, initially on foot, but eventually breaking and riding animals, and then inventing the wheel 6,000 years ago, and boats, inland, and then starting to venture away out of sight, and then inventing trains and then cars. And all of those followed a pattern. Innovation and invention at first. Someone had a crazy idea. I'm going to jump on that, wild animal and try and ride it around, or I'm going to, try and hook a wagon to the back or whatever. So then comes risk and testing something and iteration until you make improvement of whatever your means of transportation is. And then that starts to drive the overall infrastructure within your society, no matter how small or how large. And once you've gotten to a certain level, then of course you have to deal with the problems of it. As you drive infrastructure, how do you scale it and what does that do to you? And that's happened in aviation, of course. The Montgolfiers in the historic year of 1783, and the Wright brothers, 1903, Alexander Graham Bell and his team out in 1909, leading right through to the year that the University of Waterloo was founded, was the same year that we first built something that could take us above the air into space, 1957 with Sputnik. And that has led to our present situation. In the space area, it's been an amazing summer where for the first time after thousands of years of dreaming and hundreds of years of invention, we now have tourist space travel available. Well, we got to figure out what to do with it, but Blue Origin with their rocket and Virgin Galactic with what is essentially an airplane combined with a rocket flew passengers, and then SpaceX flew passengers just last month as well, orbited the world 50 times or so. But all of that comes with a tragedy of the commons. If what we're doing collectively through sort of silent agreement causes a problem that affects everyone, who's responsible? And when you get to a certain scale, it's true on the surface, it's true in space, but it's very much true in the atmosphere as well. And we need regulation. We have to get regulation in all of those industries, in spaceflight now, but obviously also in aeronautics. And what regulation needs, what leadership needs, is insight and ideas from, if you can pardon the pun, from people who are wiser than they are. And I think University of Waterloo, with its history, is in a wonderful position to provide that forethought and that information, and to take advantage of the student body and the tremendous research potential, but also the reputation and the work that's going on in the aviation side. I know probably better than everybody that with knowledge and with experience and with privilege comes responsibility. And I commend Dr. Kearns, I commend the entire school, and everyone's going to be working on this, for being willing to shoulder that responsibility, to dig in hard to the tragedies of the commons that we're facing and how to improve the technology so that it continue to serve humanity and the entire planet as well as we possibly can. Thanks.
Well, thank you for those remarks, Commander Hadfield, and thank you for being such an inspiring Canadian, and also for accepting our invitation to be an adjunct professor of aviation at the University of Waterloo and to stay involved with us now as we launch WISA. We're really grateful. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Besma Momani, who's going to be chairing a panel discussion on behalf of all of us. Dr. Momani is a professor of political science at the University of Waterloo and a senior fellow at the Center for International Governance and Innovation. She's here today in her role as the Associate Vice President for Interdisciplinary Research. And so over to you, Dr. Momani, to introduce the panelists and to get us on our way.
Thank you, Dean Audrey. Appreciate this and welcome everyone. Really, really happy to be here. I sense there's a lot of excitement in the room and for good reason. This is really a wonderful occasion. So I'm really happy to have a fantastic panel with us today. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the questions that have been brought forward by our staff, our students, our faculty. Really a lot to really get into. So allow me to introduce the panel. We have Thomas Lagarde. He's the head of product and portfolio and programs, and managing director at NavBlue. We have our very own Dr. Mary Wells, who's the Dean of Engineering. And we have Commander Chris Hadfield staying with us, as we all got introduced to him, our astronaut, our first Canadian commander of the International Space Station, and our very own Suzanne Cairns, the founding director of WISA. So welcome, everybody. Really lovely to have you all. I'm going to start with my first question for Mr. Lagarde, if I may. So what are the advantages and opportunities for industry to partner with the universities?
Good afternoon. Thank you. Well, there are, I think, many. As part of Airbus and sharing the vision that was just laid down by the commander, I think we try to find new ways of optimizing aviation. We believe a lot in aviation, and of course, aviation is very complex. So to do that, I think we need all the possible ideas. So the first benefit that we see in partnering with university and an institute like WISA is to expose early and very complex problem to young, talented students helped by professors that are really at the edge of the technology, so that we can see if we have some non-obvious solution and where we can progress, I would say, outside of the box. That's the first thing. So we are looking forward to developing new ideas and to expose new problems to fresh minds and new technologies, right? That's the first one. The second one, of course, is we are constantly looking for talents. So by partnering with university, we expose our company, our brand, but also the domain of aviation to more students. And we know that today we see that aviation is facing an image problem worldwide. And so we are passionate about that. I strongly believe in the contribution of travel to the world and to humanity and to a peaceful world. So I think it's really important for us to be able also to communicate to newer generation about that, so that it also engages them into coming to aviation to help make aviation more sustainable. And finally, the third one, I would say, we have the challenge being a company to keep our employees up to date. I mean, technologies are evolving very, very fast, and we need to help our staff to continue also to learn. So partnering with the university with challenging and advanced projects, we're going to involve our own staff. So it's, I think, a great opportunity for us also to expose them to that and to have that junction of projects, challenges, young people, industry people together to create hopefully bright ideas for the future. So really we are excited and we see a lot of benefit in that partnership.
Thank you, Thomas. Mary, if I may, Thomas talked about this pipeline of talent. So what are the skill set do you think will be the future for workforce need, particularly coming out of the universities?
No, absolutely. Thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. And just a big congratulations to Suzanne and the team that put this on. We're just so excited, the University of Waterloo, for this institute to form and for the possibilities offers our talent, which is really our students. And when you talk about talent and what, hearing what is needed in the future, this really speaks to the kinds of skills we need. And really, all of the research institute and centers we form are interdisciplinary between our faculties, our disciplines of knowledge, and it creates those opportunities for students. And I'll speak specifically about our students in engineering, for example, which will go on to be maybe the technical experts in things. Even the language that we use to describe things, and making sure that language, they can speak to people from other disciplines. And so an institute like this really provides that opportunity for those different types of students to come together to work on these complex problems that touch on so many different aspects that go much beyond the technical aspects of what is needed, whether it be, when we think about sustainability, alternate fuels, alternate propulsion systems, things like that, to thinking about, global sustainability and the climate crisis we're in and what we need to do together. And this is a problem we need to solve together. So I just think it's a wonderful opportunity to, at least for the engineering students, increase the breadth of their knowledge, their understanding, of the complexities around it, and make them better able to not only solve future problems in aviation, but also to help define them. And so that's one of the things that makes me so excited and such a strong supporter of that. And it's creating that future talent. And also on the research side, all the opportunities it also affords in terms of the research talent we will both expose to these complex problems, but also let them develop the skills that they need to go on to be the researchers that will help with issues around biofuels, new propulsion systems, new navigation systems, with a focus on sustainability into the future.
Thank you, Dean Wells. Commander Hadfield, let me ask you, you were very passionate about the global commons. And so why is WISA needed necessarily in Canada and internationally? What's the contribution for WISA here in the conversation?
I think there are quite a few schools of thought out there right now, and some of them have been advancing and some of them have been festering during the pandemic. Naturally enough, people have had maybe more time to reflect and think than they would normally when they're just active with their busy lives and travel and such. And so there's some people that would like to take an enormous step backwards, I think. And, like somehow obviate technology as if that would solve the problems and improve the quality of human life and the sustainability and health of the planet, without the recognition that there's a delicate balance, and we are keeping nearly 8 billion people fed and housed, and in a level that's never been achieved before in human history. Just 200 years ago, 80% of every human being on Earth lived in abject poverty. Just two, my folks are nearly 100. Just 2 lifetimes ago, 80% of us lived in abject poverty. It's now 10%. And that is purely the result of clever and thoughtful application of technology. But we haven't done it in a sustainable way. We invent the whole industrial revolution was built on the back of steam power, burning fossil fuels, which was a tremendous liberator and improved the quality of life and medicine and all kinds of things. But when you're going to hit 8 billion soon, and we'll probably peak out around 9 or 10 billion human beings, how can we develop technological systems that will feed us and house us and not irrevocably pollute the atmospheres and the oceans and change the chemistry of them so that it causes abject harm for so many types of life on Earth? It's a really complex problem to solve. And if we were just to stop everything, we would be condemning billions of people to death, literally. And so we need that application of our institutes of higher learning and the structures that allow us to then apply the lessons learned from those places in a way that allows life to flourish, not just survive, but actually improves the quality of life for more of the people on the planet and gives as many people opportunity as possible. And part of that is transportation. And we can focus, and we should, very closely on how it is that we move people through the air. And there are much more efficient ways to do it, some of which we've thought of and haven't developed, some of which we haven't even thought of yet. And that's why a hotbed of invention like the University of Waterloo is so good. But it also has to be weighed out in proportion. What are the other ways of moving things around? How does that affect the quality of life? How does that affect the quality of all life? It takes a really informed and thoughtful process to do that. And just as a small example, it's hard to walk through a city without hearing somebody's little gas-powered weed whacker, or one of those leaf blowers, a gas-powered leaf blower. But I read a number yesterday that the amount of undesirable chemicals that one of those little two-stroke engines, because two-strokes they're a lovely technology, but they're terrible from an environmental point of view. Just running one of those for a half hour is equivalent to driving your car 1,000 miles up the coast. And so trying to think about our piece of everything else, how does it benefit society? How can we make our piece of it better? That's what everyone, when I talk about the tragedy of the commons, needs to be willing to shoulder. And as an individual level, most people absolve themselves of that responsibility, but it needs to be collectively applied. And we've got lots of examples in the past where we've done it, the improvements of other industries. And we're by no means there on any of them, but iteratively, we need to do those things in order to continue the arc that we're on of improving quality of life and doing it in a way that's sustainable for the planet. And so I think WISA is addressing one of the key problems, and it's going to take all of those things that the Dean mentioned in order to move it along as quickly as possible. So I'm excited to be a tiny little part of it.
We all are. Thank you so much. So Professor Cairns, first of all, allow me to say congratulations, and the congratulations are pouring through in the chat. So really, you can see this is really a wonderful moment to celebrate you and the success of this organization. Allow me to ask you, so what are the key challenges that led to the creation of WISA?
Thank you so much. But again, I want to reiterate, there's so many wonderful people that have made this possible. I'm also just thankful to be a part of it, but I'm thankful to all of you as well. When it comes to the key challenges, I just want to reflect on something that happened to me for the first time about 3 years ago. So I was a kid who just loved aviation. All I ever cared, I was obsessed with watching the small planes, circle over my childhood home in Wyerton, Ontario, and I somehow convinced my family to let me start flight training when I was 15, and I was an air cadet as well. And so I understand what it's like to be a young person who loves aviation, and I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to teach many of them at the University of Waterloo in a first-year class. But about 3 years ago, a new experience happened, which is one of them came up to me at the end of a lecture, and they said, I am increasingly having my friends question why I would love aviation, because they say, why would you want to be a part of the problem? And that really struck me, because there's truth to that. Aviation is responsible for about 2% of global emissions. There's work to be done. Like we absolutely have to lean into how we can address and resolve some of those challenges. But aviation is also a force for good. And I truly, deeply believe this. Like when you think about moving people around the planet, you think about delivering vaccines, getting critical supplies to Canada's north, where there aren't roads that can access some of those communities for many parts of the year, not to mention millions of jobs and economic impact. I think we've all just experienced through the pandemic, when aviation shuts down like it did, the ripple effects of hurt and harm that come from just not being able to see your loved ones, and society sort of fracturing into different countries, that I think it's not easy to take for granted anymore how important it can be, but it needs to be done sustainably. And I think this is the whole goal. And it was a learning process for myself. When I joined Waterloo, I was challenged to teach a course on aviation sustainability, and I learned about it for the first time in teaching it. And it just seemed to make so much sense that these three pillars, that the environmental impacts, we have to address those, but while supporting the economic success of those organizations that are doing all that good and moving vital supplies around the world. And we also need to think really hard about the people, both like supporting things like sustainable tourism into parts of the developing world that are dependent on air travel to support those communities, but also because I care a lot about the people in aviation, thinking about the workforce itself, everything from human factors and flight physiology and education and training, diversity and inclusion and equity within aviation itself. There's a lot that we can do to support it. And I think what's really neat is it does touch every corner of campus in different ways. So it's very exciting to see it moving forward.
Indeed. If I might return to Thomas, we have some great questions coming in from the students I'd love to pose to you, Thomas. This one is coming from a student who asked, how do we convey the urgency of needing to advance sustainable aeronautics? As the student noted, it's much easier for current companies to keep doing what they're doing than it is to actually take the decision for such a big set of design considerations and changes. How do we push alongside such large institutions with our small ideas? Great question.
I think that's a very, very good question. I think my answer will be there are two things. The first thing is, I think the mindset of everybody is changing. And the pressure, the public pressure is increasing very, very fast, pushing, of course, aviation and other industry to change and to become much more sustainable. I mean, anybody who has some young kids, like I have a 15 and a 11 years old boy. I can see the difference in their eyes and what they say about that. I can see that sustainability is really something that they live with. There is no choice for them. So I think the pressure and the pressure of everybody is going to be very, very strong. The other side of the equation, I think, that's really interesting to see that sustainability, the three axes defined by Suzanne about sustainability, the social, environmental, and economical sustainability. We know that the airline industry is a tough environment, and airline profitability is always really slim. We have, I think, sustainability challenge can be turned into an opportunity if we provide solutions to aviation that are also helping them being more profitable, right? And so we are working on that. And I think there are a number of things that we can do where we can really tackle the two problems at the same time, providing them with optimization for their current solution that is pushing for more sustainable operation and also pushing for reduced cost of operation. So I think if we can develop solutions around that and we can be creative, then it's going to be very, very natural for all the companies, you know, and for the CEOs of the airlines to go there. So I think that's definitely an avenue that I would like to accelerate on.
Thank you. Dean Wells, we have a question about the Industrial Revolution 4.0. And the question from our staff is, how do you see robotics and automation technologies, including sensor fusion, autonomous systems, playing a role in the future of sustainable aviation?
Yeah, thanks, Besma. That's a really great question. And I see, you know, such parallels between maybe what's happening in the automotive industry compared to aviation. I realize they're quite different, but in terms of, you know, the use of autonomous vehicles, and really a plane is, I guess, an autonomous vehicle too, or a plane when the pilot puts on autopilot and things. So that there's just much to be learned around that. But I definitely, you know, there's so many sensors, and I think we saw a very tragic thing with the MAX 8 in terms of maybe the arrogance of the technology, thinking it could know more than the human being. And so I think there's a lot to be learned around the human factors associated with how humans interface with technology, and you know, to make it a very powerful and positive relationship, and not again, that one is more powerful than the other, especially not the technology. So understanding all that and how that interface between humans and technology is becoming so pervasive in all of our lives that it's critical, but very important in terms of this. So definitely, we have some world-class robotics. We now have robotics people that are looking at that interface between humans and robots, and how can we make sure that's a very positive relationship and things like that. And I see that definitely playing a huge role in terms of aviation into the future. The use of sensors, the use of AI to optimize route patterns and navigation, that we haven't really employed the technologies and tools we have available today to be able to now start to make more sustainable routes and things like that. So definitely lots of things we can learn from other disciplines we've been working in and apply it now to aviation.
Yeah, absolutely. The analogy with the automotive industry is really a great one. Thank you, Dean Wells. Commander Hatfield, let me ask you, we have a great question from our alumni. And this alumni member is really interested in the aviation in the Canadian North. And the question this individual has is, how would we reduce greenhouse gases and other emissions, yet still meet the requirements for sustainable transport in the Canadian North when the Canadian North is so highly dependent on AC and frequently uses older, sometimes 50 years older AC frames because of the variety of factors, but mostly costs?
I've been looking at the questions here, Besma, and thanks. And a theme that is right in my heart. When I retired after 35 years with the government, I kind of set myself a small mantra of trying to decide what I was going to devote my energies to. And it was, how can I contribute to improving the quality of life for as many people as possible in a sustainable way? And that's kind of how I choose which projects I'm going to get involved in and who I'm working with. So if you look at the questions that are in the list and that sort of idea, and you look at the North, how do we provide basic human services in the North? Whether it's something as simple as heat and power, connectivity, healthcare, all the things that in the larger population centers of the country that we take for granted. It's complicated. It is hugely imperfect right now and unjust. And people, it's not like it's a simple solution to solve or a simple problem to solve. But it's going to be remedied to the best possible way through clever and urgent application of our cutting edge technologies. Maybe a small example. Let's say we want to connect Joe Haven to the world. It's very difficult right now because of its latitude. But at the same time, using the latest technology, people have put satellites in orbit that can now provide broadband, high-speed broadband to anybody on Earth, no matter where they are. That's like a problem that we haven't been able to solve for generations, is now, because of an advent of technology, it now becomes turnkey easy in a remote community. How do we provide power? The simplest thing is bring up drums of diesel oil, high sulfur diesel oil, and then, oh, well, we can't have high sulfur because obviously it's a terrible idea, and try and learn as we go. But the world's supply of the right type of petrochemical fuels like that is even threatened and dwindling. And so, need another source. And Canada and other countries are doing really hard work in the area of nuclear batteries, where you have a small, safe, portable, long-term, non-polluting heat source, and nothing is non-polluting, but relatively non-polluting. And so that can help address the fundamental nature of providing power. Transportation back and forth. It's really weird as a species, but we have a real hard time dealing with water when it freezes. We can deal with it if it's frozen, we can deal with it if it's liquid, but when it's in the interstitial state, it messes up most of our means of moving around, snowmobiles or trucks or walking or whatever. Aviation supersedes that. And that's why aviation has been so important in opening up opportunities to the North, getting people up there to provide healthcare and education and such. And so trying to find ways to improve the aviation component of what's happening in the remote parts of the world And we say the North, but really it's anywhere on Earth that people live remote from the population centers. And the steady improvement of the technologies in aviation so that they become less and less polluting. And the airline that's running out of Vancouver Harbor is in the process right now of converting to pure electric for that particular market. It looks like the power density of the batteries may be good enough that they can switch away from internal combustion engines and go purely to electric engines. And that's the edge of the wedge, right? That's our batteries are rapidly getting better. Energy storage is everything. And so you can't just instantaneously make it happen. And we need to sustain the lives that exist and the kids, but at the same time, we need to work doubly hard on the technologies that make things better. And I think that applies to aviation in the North just as much as it does to all the other examples I mentioned.
Thank you, Commander. Professor Cairns, we have a couple of questions from community members. I'm going to combine two, but they really do get to the essence of some of the great work that WISA has ahead of it. What are the communications going to be in terms of getting people on board with sustainable aviation and what that will mean for the future of travel? I know some of us in this COVID era just can't wait to get on a plane and go back to normal, but we're also reminded that there is probably no going back to normal in many ways. And the other part of the question, or a second question also came from the community members, is if you could talk a little bit about some of the research agenda and projects that are being planned for WISA.
Perfect. Thank you, Vesma. From a communications perspective, I think that's one of the sort of key things we need to figure out with WISA, that we have different partnership groups. So both our industry partners who we're excited to collaborate with, the research community, but also the general public. We want to make sure that we are being of service and addressing and sharing what we learn through the research in the Institute with all of those groups. That being said, I think a lot of that will play out in the coming months. I know we have recently some really exciting partnerships with industry and airlines that we'll be announcing through our WISA social media channels in the coming week. So I would welcome anyone to follow along there, and that will help us as far as communication in the short term. As far as research, this is actually really exciting. There's a variety of different projects, but I can only really speak to the ones that I've been directly involved in. When in reality, WISA is a facilitator. So our goal is to take, as many of those far-reaching types of researchers and help them connect to aviation. The reason why I think this is so important is because if you think of problems in the real world, they rarely fall within one discipline. They often cross disciplines. And so in our world, in academia, we call it interdisciplinary. But in the reality, I think that that's quite typical in the real world, that a lot of the problems do cross disciplines. And I'll just give you one example of many research projects that are going on. So I'm part of a research project with a really wonderful team of colleagues. And what we're doing is we're really questioning how to optimize pilot training using a flight simulator device. So we have, my background is in education or competency-based education. And the concept is that traditional pilot licensing is based on hours flown, but that has a lot of challenges. And it's kind of a more traditional way to look at it, because everyone knows that it's not the hour itself that has an impact on a person's learning. It's what happens during that hour. I think we've all had life-changing experiences that took 5 minutes, and we probably had 3-hour-long lectures, which were not maybe as life-changing. Perhaps people were distracted or on their phone. So it's not the time that's inherently powerful. It's what we do within that time. And yet licensing standards for aviation are all based on how many hours you have. So competency-based training is all about, can we define the knowledge, skill, and attitude that is required for a person to have competence, to work as a professional, rather than the actual hours? And then can that be the licensing standard, which would then allow us to really optimize how long that training takes by making it much more efficient? So I have a colleague, Dr. Shirasao, who's in engineering, and he's very connected to machine learning and artificial intelligence. So he's very interested in, as a pilot's training in a simulator, collecting that data, and eventually can the simulator automatically assess that person and sort of give them a readout to say how close they are to achieving competence. I have a wonderful colleague, Dr. Beth Irving, in optometry, and she's very interested in evidence-based visual standards. So using visual devices to track how eyes move around a flight deck and potentially allowing that to feed into the artificial intelligence model. And another wonderful colleague, Dr. Eva Nietrig-Schwedo in health, who's a kinesiologist who's looking at gaze behavior, how your eyes jump around. So it's really interesting because all of these disciplines coming together to solve one problem, but the reason and the way it connects to sustainability is because if we can produce the evidence that justifies fewer hours of training in an aircraft, so you can use a simulator instead, it has sustainability impacts. It is less fuel burned in small aircraft, reducing noise impacts as well. It's generally less expensive for a flight student in a simulator versus an aircraft. So the student is saving money and their training is customized to themselves, so more efficient. And often the flight schools have higher profit margins on simulators, excuse me, than actual aircraft. So it's hitting social, environmental, and economic benefits.
Yeah, thank you. That's really, really helpful. Dean Wells, I have a question about partnerships. And I know that obviously the Faculty of Engineering is really, really big on having such great collaborations with industry partners. So the question here is, how can potential partners bring ideas for collaboration forward? What should I do if I have ideas to bring forward regarding aviation sustainability?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for that. And I would say, I've worked at a few universities, and in my experience, Waterloo is probably the most industry relevant university. And part of its founding was based on a very strong partnership with industry. So definitely we love industry partners because we like to work on real world problems and use our technical skills to help them advance in whatever way they do. So we do, feel free to reach out to me and then I can pass it on to my associate in research, or just feel free to reach out to WISA directly, and they will, as they've kind of indicated through Zen, curate those opportunities for connecting the right people and the right researchers to the industry partner and things like that. So there's a number of ways you can reach out. And I did notice, I think, something else in the chat about researchers at other universities, maybe that are in engineering, that do work in aviation already. And definitely we don't feel that we can do it all by ourselves. So if there are other researchers out there or on this call that are interested in looking at ways they can partner with the University of Waterloo and WISA, please feel free to reach out to us or WISA. And I'm sure there's ways that we will find ways to boldly collaborate together, because this is an issue that we do need to come together to work on. It's such an important issue, and we're very open to that.
Thank you. Thomas, if I may return to you, we have a question that I'm just going to mend a little bit to see if something if there's some ideas that have sparked here, but do you have any thoughts on how airports can be involved, particularly when it comes to thinking about, reducing greenhouse gas emissions in aviation? As you sort of sit in the vantage point of industry, what are the other stakeholders that have a really valuable role to play in this broader conversation?
Oh, that's a really good question. And that's a topic that I am really adamant about, because optimizing airline operation is not just a flight. It should be the overall operation. And today, we know that, for instance, delay at airports, or the airlines have produced and developed ways to optimize their operation, the flight that is pretty advanced. And then the airport are not yet there because of the fact that you have multiple stakeholders coming together, different airlines, then the people on the ground, the fuel, the catering, all the baggage, all of that. So optimization of the airport is part of the sustainability overall. For instance, because if you think of the lead time when the aircraft is taxiing on the ground, you can taxi with one single engine taxi, or you want not to push back so that the taxiing time from the gate to the departure is the shortest. So we have a number of optimization we can do to the airport operations that are going to benefit overall in terms of sustainability, be it for fuel, for noise also impact on the population around. So yes, definitely all the stakeholders in the entire environment have something to play. And an airport operation is, for me, an area where there are big buckets of optimization that we can trigger. But this requires all the stakeholders of the aviation to connect and to cooperate. And this is, I would say, maybe not the strongest part today. And there are, again, many improvements we can make if everybody is coming together onto a platform that allow to cooperate and to solve the problems together. Because if you think of punctuality, probably better coordination between the different stakeholders on the airport will help greatly. So that's an area where we have a lot of progress to make and a lot to investigate.
Yeah, thank you. This really is when we talk about collaboration, you know, as Dean Will said, it's other faculty, other universities, and similarly, clearly looking at industry and other actors involved in this whole ecosystem is really important to the conversation. Commander Hadfield, let me ask you a question. This is about space research, so naturally this goes to you. And maybe you can give us some thoughts on what kind of space-related topics should be a consideration to WISA and to stakeholders in the community.
Well, there's the obvious one, and that is that nobody gets to space without going through the atmosphere. And all of the vehicles have aerodynamic properties on their way up and on their way back. And it's a question of proportion to some degree. If you go back to the last pre-COVID big year of aviation, I think there was something like nearly 40 million commercial flights in 2018, if I have my number right. I forget, it's like 120 space flights. So it's still kind of a small proportion, but things have changed since 2018, where Virgin Galactic, after 20 years of work, now has a winged vehicle taking people to the edge of space. And so does Blue Origin after over 20 years of work. They're sort of like an early type of airline, but almost everything that they do is still within our atmosphere. And so there's the regulatory side of that. I mean, there's all this silly confusion about whether you get astronaut wings or not. That's just a tiny little indicator of the fact that the regulation is, as it normally is well behind the technology. And so there's a tremendous role for an organization like WISA to look at what regulations are needed. Where do we need to help the regulators, whether it's Transport Canada or the FAA or whomever, to try and put out things that are reasonable, that allow business, that allow exportation, that allow people to move around the world, but that also have the long-term goals and sustainable benefits in mind. The development of fuels, if you just burn hydrazine, it's nasty stuff, and it's maybe okay for specific purposes at small numbers. But if you're going to scale into some sort of larger business, then that's obviously not a good choice. And I saw some of the questions about maybe using hydrogen, oxygen, and some rockets do burn purely. The space shuttle that I flew twice, the shuttle itself only burned hydrogen and oxygen. You need to integrate it into the overall polluting demand. Where did the hydrogen come from and the oxygen, and what are the processes and such? But I think the line between aeronautics and space travel, just by the very nature of it, they're much more blurred than they may seem, and they're going to become more blurred as our vehicles become better and simpler, more autonomous, and therefore far more ubiquitous. And so it's the Institute for Sustainable Aeronautics and the atmosphere, maybe just to finish, even up on the space station, which is 400 kilometers up, we could still feel the weight of the atmosphere pushing against our vehicle and slowing us down and dragging us below. So I don't think that just, above where airliners fly is where the ideas and the responsibility and potentially the benefit of WISA is going to end.
Yeah, thank you so much. Suzanne, if I can turn to you, we know that you're very passionate about EDI. We've had this conversation before. Would love for you to talk more about how you see WISA helping to build a more socially just and inclusive, diverse community within the aviation industry.
Absolutely, I'm happy to. So I'll maybe take it back to share that when I was a student at university, I went to an aeronautical university, and it was very common to be the only woman in the class for much of that experience. That's fairly typical of the way aviation has historically been. Right now, in the airline world, women make up about 5% of airline pilots. And it's interesting because if you think about parallel industries like medicine or law, where they maybe were like that as far as the distribution, they've made great strides forward in balancing it out. And yet aviation is still really challenging. Sometimes people will question women in aviation and they'll say things like, well, maybe you're not a good mother, for example, if you're a female pilot because you're away from home so much. And yet we would always question that and say, well, they don't ask the flight attendants the same question, who generally are female and are also away and traveling at the same time. So there's a lot of work to do, but I like to put it in the context of what we call the NGAP initiative, or the next generation of aviation professionals. This is something I was a part of with ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, before the pandemic, starting to look at impending personnel shortages of pilots, air traffic controllers, and aircraft maintenance engineers on an international scale. Of course, the pandemic has flipped everything upside down, but the predictions are that there's going to be a reemergence of personnel shortages very soon, much more quickly than we anticipate. So I think the challenge when you look at NGAP, how do you bring people in, is we tend to look at it as sort of three approaches. There's attracting people into aviation, educating those people to become a competent professional, and then retaining them once they're on the job. And I think when you think about equity, diversity, and inclusion, how it has to factor into all three of those steps. There's some amazing initiatives across Canada and internationally looking at outreach to young people. Air Cadets is what was the one that worked for me when I was a child, but there are many other wonderful programs that sort of ignite that spark. A lot of people in my generation also had the experience of being invited to a cockpit during a flight, because this was pre 9/11, when kids used to be invited up during the cruise portion. Of course, that's not possible anymore. But then the next piece is education. And I think this is the part that is also a challenge and a real focus, because before the pandemic, there was a lot of outreach work, but all of the seats in educational programs were filled, right? So additional resources and money and time kept going into outreach, but it didn't make any difference because there's 3 times more people who want to get into the program than we have seats available. So we haven't expanded our educational capacity. And that's where some of my research on competency-based education, really like, how can you take a more modern approach to training people and helping them achieve competency more effectively? And so that can sort of condense the footprint and create more space and capacity. But the third element of that is retention on the job. And I think that's where it really does need a top-down approach, where as an industry, we look and we say, hey, there's shortages on the horizon. It doesn't make any sense to only appeal to half of the population or less than half of the population. We need to make sure that all of those passionate young people who, dream of a career in the skies, and they really are very passion driven, that they can find a place and be supported and feel included in that process. And that's where I'm excited for WISA to reach out to other types of researchers across campus that maybe didn't previously see their connection to aviation, because a lot of that research in arts, for example, I always say that in aviation, we have the same toolbox. And what I hope WISA can do is look to other disciplines and say, what tools are in your toolbox? And maybe we can share and then address some of these more complicated challenges.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to quickly add a story that I once heard a military pilot, Canadian Army military pilot, who said when she searched the term pilot, she had to go through so many Google search pages to find an image of a woman. And so really looking forward to the great work of WISA, Suzanne, to really, bust that myth and change perceptions. Let me ask, if I may, turning to Dean Wells again. There's a great question here about graduate research and education opportunities. And the question I want to know is, how can graduate students get more involved too? What are the kind of opportunities are there available for our graduate students to get involved with WISA and other programs when it comes to aviation?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. And I just, before I answer that, I just want to touch on something Suzanne said about EDI, because I noticed she did not use engineering as an exemplar of a profession that has done very well in attracting women and other diversity. And she's right, we haven't. And I think, I've also done quite a bit of work to figure out what can we do. Waterloo's doing fairly well. We're at about 35% women in engineering, so we're a leader in the country, but there's still more that can be done. And so in terms of my experience, one of the things that would be very attractive to women that I found in engineering is the idea of sustainability into the future. And so I think just even having WISA here now will help us to attract more women into this. And I'm hoping more women in engineering as well, in terms of opportunities to contribute their talents and skills to making this very important industry more sustainable into the future. So I think we can learn from each other around that point. But in terms of our graduate students, I think clearly there's a number of really interesting opportunities for graduate students. First and foremost, I guess, in terms of advancing research and advancing knowledge in these different areas, whether that be the latest generation materials that would be used on the engineering front through additive manufacturing, advanced manufacturing techniques, the biofuels, new propulsion systems, things like that. So there's a very direct way to get involved through the research we're doing through our research groups and our research professors. And so reaching out to them in terms of their research expertise and their connection to aviation and sustainable aviation. We don't have anything right now in terms of professional degrees, but I can see huge opportunities in terms of the development of new academic programs, possibly into the future, more towards a professional master's degree or something like that, maybe interdisciplinary in terms of engineering with the faculty environment or some of the other faculties that would be more directed towards this industry. And then finally, for those students that are maybe already engaged in another program right here, I'm quite confident that WISA will be doing a number of seminar series, maybe short courses, things like that, for the engagement of our greater community to learn more about some of the different fields that you may be interested in. So I think there'll be a number of different ways that you can connect into WISA and this particular field, and that that we embrace that in terms of welcoming you to be able to do that and bringing your own talent and knowledge to bear on this very critical and important problem.
Yeah, very much. Thomas, can I ask a question about the jobs of the future? There's a lot of questions here about, what's the demand for pilots and technical support staff? I wonder if you could comment on, basically, I'm sure there are students online who are also very interested in looking at this as a profession. Wondering if you could comment a little bit about the potential and future of jobs in this industry.
So I think that's a tricky question. There are several different, I would say, views on that. For years, I think people have been, we've been speaking about a pilot shortage or not. And I think definitely there will, despite the fact that manufacturers are working for concept with less pilots in the cockpit, the need for a pilot in the cockpit, I think, will remain for the foreseeable future. I don't see mass transportation aircraft being accepted by the public without having a human being in the cockpit. I think, as you may know, at Airbus, we are working on single pilot operation, first in cruise, then complete new concept of cockpit with only one pilot. But we think that the use of a pilot will be there for a long time. And then after that, in any case, if a pilot is not in the cockpit, you will need to have ground support, management of operation. So today, I think we are working on trying to enhance the decision making of the human with the technology, but the human being is at the center of the decision. Be it on the ground or in the cockpit. So I think in terms of first of airline operation or in the future drones operation, transportation, any kind of transportation operation, human being will remain at the center of that. Of course, will be again supported by technology because the decisions are very complex, and the more we want to optimize, the more we want to augment, I would say, the intelligence of the human with systems of support and decision-making support. But there are a number of exciting topics. And then, as said, we have a number of new technologies that will require also a lot of new development. Take hydrogen. I've seen in the question about hydrogen. But so we at Airbus, we believe that to achieve the net zero in terms of emission, the routes will go via hydrogen propulsion. But it means we have to reinvent the full logistic around that, right? Delivering hydrogen to airports or to any kind of vehicle. It's a new complete logistic chain we have to rebuild. It's not the same as delivering fuel. So there are a number of studies, not only on the propulsion itself, but in the entire ecosystem. And then that will create job opportunities, be it in the operation, in the design.
Oh, I think we lost you there. So if I may, I'll move to Commander Hatfield. We have a question here about regulatory agencies like Transport Canada, and wondering if you could talk about what might be the role for regulatory representatives like Transport Canada in this broader conversation.
It's pivotal. The problem historically has always been with regulatory bodies is just naturally when a wild-eyed inventor is somewhere coming up with their new idea, they're just assuming that eventually the regulatory system will catch up to them, but they're just trying to make the idea work. They're the innovator or the entrepreneur. They'll live within the existing regulatory structure, as needed, but when the technology supersedes the assumptions of the regulations, where are we? And it's true for every industry. And Canada is, of course, to a large degree, often overwhelmed by our neighbor to the south in a lot of different areas, including the decisions that might be taken by the sister agency down there, the FAA. And so we have to see what they're doing. And in truth, if you look at upper atmosphere and space travel, the FAA has been tasked to a large degree with starting to regulate that and trying to come up with the appropriate policies and what are the right things, what makes sense, what is the greatest trade-off between public good and intent and safety and sustainability. And that role falls to Transport Canada as well. So I think it's smart to obviously to be engaging with Transport Canada and the FAA. It happens all the time. And I'm looking forward to see as WISA develops, to see exactly how that's going to become part of it, and then how you can take the ideas right as early as possible and start getting them into the structures that then have to do their mandate of trying to put things in balance for the public good.
Yeah, certainly. Speaking of which, Suzanne, there's a question here about sort of the short term and long term, and the comment with, companies and even governments often operate on the basis of short term, but WISA must think long term. And wondering if you could make a pitch for, why WISA and added to that, research in general has that, a comparative advantage of being able to think long term. So I'd love to think or have you articulate why it is that WISA is really the right place to have that kind of visionary thinking.
Well, perfect, thank you. And I just want to reiterate to Commander Hatfield's point that WISA has formed an advisory committee, which he's very graciously agreed to be an honorary member of, but we have a variety of other industry representatives, including Wendy Bailey from Transport Canada and other colleagues as well, that our goal is to make sure we do align the work we're doing with regulatory impact that is absolutely critical. And I think if there was one challenge or criticism you could make of other, and not to criticize anyone, but of other institutions, is that it possibly disconnects research from the industry. And I think what we want to do, WISA, we want to be seen as really a bridge or a front door to the University of Waterloo for the aviation, aerospace, and space sectors, so that we can help facilitate those questions. But to your point about the importance of research, as I sort of mentioned earlier, the challenge with any industry, I imagine, is that when you have the leadership of that industry who's all trained in the same way, then we all have this same toolbox. We all have the same types of skills. And I think the challenge then is when we're facing persistent challenges, we're all trying to apply the same mechanisms or the same solutions to those challenges, and then sort of scratching our head and saying, why doesn't this work? And this is what struck me, and one of the reasons why I thought WISA could be so impactful. because I started paying attention to some of the world leading aviation schools. And what I was seeing was they were recruiting in areas where Waterloo already has bench strength, whether it's computer science or engineering or physiology and health. And I remember seeing these job ads and thinking, well, gosh, we have some amazing expertise here. It's just this process of mobilizing it and directing it towards impactful challenges. So I think the role of research, it's really twofold, right? It's research, but then education, because then through the process of research, we're educating these future leaders to go out and build that knowledge economy in Canada and help support, what the future looks like. And I just want to circle back when you talk about the impact of research, that we've been developing something called a collaborative aeronautics program, which is not approved yet. It's still in a developmental stage. But the concept would be that we could add aeronautics to a wide variety of degrees across campus. And I think what is really exciting about this potential, and it will be at least a year before we would be able to launch it, but that we could really take all of those young, bright minds and their supervisors and really start mobilizing and ramping up on a broader scale some of the impact that they can have on the aeronautics space. The other thing I wanted to just very briefly mention, going back to regulatory impacts, is that any regulator, I think, would be hesitant to evolve or change regulations unless there's evidence showing that it's safe and they have been, tested and validated. And across the board, the number one most important thing in aviation is safety. And so nothing is going to be done if it's potentially posing a risk to passengers or the industry. So I think that's another asset that WISA can provide is through research generating new evidence that might justify the evolution of some of those regulations.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add impartiality, right? I mean, that's the great benefit also of this happening in a research community, is really the directed by the love of science and evidence-based solutions. So thank you so much. I have one last question as we're coming near to an end that I'd love to pose to everybody, and I'll start with Dean Wells on this one, which is where do you hope to see WISA in 5 to 10 years from now? How do you see them impacting change?
Well, I guess there's a couple of things when I dream about, the next 5 to 10 years where I'd like to see it be, is just a couple of themes, I guess. Number one, the research it's been able to do, and the researchers across our disciplines that have been able to come together to really advance sustainability in this area, and for it to be known internationally as the place that has really changed the game in terms of sustainability in this industry and things. So I think that's one of them. I think in terms of the talent, it's about, our young people knowing that Waterloo is the place to go if this is the thing that you want to do, and being able to attract that kind of future talent, especially women and diverse groups into this field. So I think that would be another marker to me that had been successful. And even just to hear Suzanne already talk about this idea about collaborative academic programming, so that we now can offer collaborative programs across our disciplines to be able to train the future talent that we need in this field. So those are some of my hopes and dreams for the future. I'm very optimistic under the leadership of Suzanne that she's able to do that. She's a clear collaborator, as evidenced by this launch and all the people from all the different disciplines here. So congratulations once again, Suzanne.
Indeed, indeed. Thomas, may I turn to you with the exact same question? Where do you hope to see WISA in 5 to 10 years, particularly from sort of an industry perspective?
Certainly. Well, I hope that in 5 to 10 years, we can have some solutions that we will have co-developed or started to explore at WISA that will be in operation and providing with really a step change in terms of helping the aviation to be more sustainable, and that we will have expanded also, I think, the initial scope. I mean, we start with NavBlue, but I'm pretty sure that there are many other things we could do and that Suzanne would like to do, expanding to the bigger Airbus, that our mother company. So if in 5 to 10 years, the collaboration has been expanded from the small NavBlue compared to the big Airbus to the whole aircraft design and training and flight operation, I'm sure that would be a great success for that. So let's shoot for it.
Definitely. I hope we're all invited back, this time in person, in 5 to 10 years, again, for the next celebration, Suzanne, hopefully. Let me turn to Commander Hatfield, please. Same question to you. Where do you hope to see WISA in 5 to 10 years from now?
5 to 10 years can seem like a long time, but it can just go so quick as well. I think normal human nature is to resist change. You know, I got my problems solved, and I kind of want things to go along like they are. Like I want tomorrow to be sort of like yesterday. It's just change is often hard. The role of business is to make money, and that's what drives the economy, and so that's a different influence. The role of government, of course, is to try and you know, give peace and order, but often it's not government that is radically leading what's happening. And government has obviously their own strictures and the necessity to get reelected and all the standard patterns and complaints. So there's a unique role for WISA here. And in 5 to 10 years, I'm looking forward to seeing the impacts of fulfilling that role. And that role is to be a forward thinker, a provider of needed information to the bodies that can take advantage of it to fit it into society, but also the incredibly lucky crucible of being located at a place with a bunch of really bright and motivated and enabled young people to work on some of the problems, and tying all those ideas into the, you know, the realities of just how all this has to work together. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be take a lot of work in order to fulfill that role. But you know, that's why Suzanne and company created it. And so what I'm really looking forward to is how WISA has pushed at the edges of the things that need to be pushed in a certain direction in order to do what needs to be done long term. And that's on the technological side. It's on the you know, just the how we treat people and try and make sure things are working fairly side. And then also on the long-term sustainability side for health on the planet. I think there's a role in all three areas, and the Institute is beautifully positioned to be a fulcrum working in all three of those.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Suzanne, final thoughts to you on the same question, sort of thinking about where you hope to be in 5 to 10 years. I know you've got a tall order, right? We've heard lots of great ideas already today. But yeah, please give us some of the things that you hope to be celebrating with all of us again in 5 to 10 years.
Thank you. Well, and thank you, Vesma, for all your work in moderating this discussion. In short, I hope that Waterloo can grow to become a hub of sustainable aeronautics research and education, both in attracting industry partners, government supporters, and students for that next generation of talent. But I think, you know, to know that it would be a success, what I would really love is in the future when I'm teaching that first year class to, you know, 120 of these student pilots just getting started, that they can go into this industry proud that they are part of capitalizing on aeronautics as being a force for good, while not turning a blind eye to the environmental impacts, to leaning into the need to identify solutions and trying to be a part of that positive change.
Wonderful. Really, really well said. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dean Wells. Thank you, Thomas Lagarde from NAVBLUE. Thank you, Commander Hatfield. And thank you, Suzanne. I'm going to turn the floor back to my colleague, Dean Audrey.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thanks to many of you. I know most of you have stuck with us throughout this fascinating exchange of ideas. And thanks for all those who've asked questions, and just reiterating thanks to Vesma for moderating, and to Chris, Mary, and Thomas and Suzanne for participating. You know, you can imagine we have had people within the community of the Faculty of Environment ask why a faculty that's so committed to sustainability has invested so much in aviation training and now in aviation research. You know, and the obvious point that they're making is that the carbon intensivity of the aviation sector is currently so high. And, you know, my answer to that query is that, you know, change comes by tackling the challenges, not by backing away. And that's exactly what WISA is doing. And that's why we're so proud of this initiative. And I know the last 18 months has been pretty hard on the aviation aeronautics sectors. It's been a time of disruption, But disruption brings opportunity for innovation, and innovation will lead to progress. And WISA and the University of Waterloo are committed to working with our partners in these industries and in the public and private sectors in order to make progress toward a sustainable future. So again, I want to thank you for joining us. We look forward to connecting and sharing more in the coming months. And you never know, in a year from now, we might be inviting you back to launch the Collaborative Aeronautics Graduate Training Program that also will be pan university and I think groundbreaking. So wonderful to spend time with you, and have a good day. Thank you so much.